Hi, everyone. My name is Matt. Thank you so much for coming. I don't know if we have folks on Zoom, but for everybody here on Zoom as well, this is going to be, just as a heads up, we're going to be recording this so it can be put out later on for folks that are not able to attend right now. So just keep that in mind. My name is Matthew Garrell. I'm the editor-in-chief at Clemantis, and I'm responsible for putting on events such as this for everybody with our wonderful partners with Megan and Jared here at the Howe. I'm also a graduate student in the Master of Arts in Liberal Studies program with a concentration in creative writing. Just to give a little description of what Clemantis is for folks that may be unaware. Clemantis, the Mal's Journal, is a biannual graduate student publication at Dartmouth. The journal aims to showcase the strongest pieces of creative and critical writing submitted by Mal students, Mal's alumni, and Guarini graduate students. By selecting and integrating work from all four concentrations at Mal's, creative writing, cultural studies, globalization, and general liberal studies, and from our broader Guarani community, we endeavor to promote intellectual engagement, fruitful questioning, and honest discourse within the realm of liberal studies. Now, Joni B. Cole. So, Joni B. Cole is the author of 7 books, including 2 writing guides, Good Naked, How to Write More, Write Better, and Be Happier, listed as one of the best books for writers by Poets and Writers, and Toxic Feedback, Helping Writers Survive and Thrive. American Book Review said of Toxic Feedback, quote, "I can't imagine a better guide to writing's rewards and perils than this fine book," end quote. Joni also created the 3-volume This Day in the Life of American Women series, described by Publishers Weekly as fascinating and eye-opening. She runs the Writers Center of White River Junction, Vermont, and has been a teacher and speaker at a diversity of academic programs and writing conferences around the country, including AmeriCorps, the Independent Publishers of New England, Harvard's Continuing Medical Education Program, the Miami Book Fair, and the Irma Bombeck Humor Writers Workshop. Joni also is a contributor to the Writer magazine and recently launched a regional monthly newspaper column called Realish. Her second collection of personal essays, Party Like It's 2044, essays on finding the funny in life and death, is due for release this fall, or it's probably already out, or?
No, this fall.
This coming fall.
I know, I'm doing the page proofs right now.
From the University of New Mexico Press. More information can be found at her website, jonibcole.com.
Thank you for that introduction, Matthew. It's great to be here. And I cannot speak more highly of the MALS program. I went there. I think it's fabulous.
Thank you so much. Now, just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll jump right into it. So, and I should clarify this at the front, at the beginning. What we're going to be talking about query letter-wise is specifically for prose writing. So fiction and narrative nonfiction. This will not be covering poetry specifically. That's kind of a whole other can of worms. Now, the first thing we're going to be talking about is first defining what a query letter is, their importance, how to write one, what's the difference between a fictional and non-fictional query letter, and then we'll go into the query letter's do's and don'ts. We'll look at a number of different example letters from different genres, and that's where we'll really get the audience interaction. So we're going to try to dissect a little bit of these, and then we'll end with a Q&A, and then hopefully everybody can socialize a little bit and enjoy some of the great food we have over there too. We got sushi and all this fun stuff. Now, without further ado, we'll jump right into it.
That's great.
Wonderful. So before we even do anything, I want to kind of probe the audience. What does everybody know about query letters? What do you think they are? Are you familiar with them? What are they for?
Well, I'm learning about them and lots of YouTube, so I was really happy to hear about this in-person workshop on it. And it's to put your work out there to see if it can get accepted by an agent who will then shop it to the top 5.
Exactly. Anybody else as well? Well, yeah.
My question is for editors or for agents?
I'm sorry, what?
It is for editors or for agents?
It's for both. That's the one addendum to yours. It's depending on if you go to a publisher where you can They accept unsolicited manuscripts. That means you don't need an agent to represent you. then you'd be writing your query directly to your editor or the editor. And if you're seeking an agent because you are shooting for one of the big 5 publishers, then you definitely need to be represented by an agent. And so you start by querying agents. So the letter itself might be very similar, aside from a few word choices, but it depends on where you're querying. So good question.
All right, I think we can go to the next one there. So to Joni, what are the essentials of a query letter and why are they so important?
That's a small topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, people get really intimidated writing query letters. And there's no question they take as many drafts as the manuscript practically. But one thing that helps me relax when I write a query letter is to remember there is a human being as a recipient. And so when I get all tangled up in the components and this and the stakes, which are very high, of course, I do go back to the reality. I'm writing to a person. What would she or he want to hear or they would want to hear? And so that helps to calm me down. But the sole purpose of a query, as the slide indicates, is you want to entice them to ask for more. You want to entice them to either ask for your manuscript or the first 10 pages, or to ask for your proposal if it's a nonfiction project. So it is a sales letter. It really is. Thankfully, they're short query letters. And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong, which is they write volumes and volumes. Think about your busy agent or editor's life. She probably gets dozens, if not hundreds of these a week. And so what goes into it is very important, and we'll talk about that a little later, but shorter, pithier is better. Query letter for fiction is usually a page, if that, single-spaced with double spaces between paragraphs. A nonfiction query can be a little longer because there's other elements. There's a few extra elements that go into that. But luckily, you can see the word count there, which really helps you to kind of distill it down to its essence, 200 to 450 words for fiction and whatever that translates to for a page and a half. The other thing to remember before you query, though I have a caveat about this one, is to finish your manuscript if it's a novel. If you're working on fiction, you want your novel done before you send out query letters. If it's a nonfiction project, you do not need to have your project done, but you definitely want to have a proposal ready to go. And you want probably at least a few sample chapters for your own peace of mind to prove you can do it. So you don't want to send queries out before. If someone responds that day and says, send me your proposal, you better be ready, or send me your manuscript, you better be ready. So you don't want to send them out before. But in writing the query letter, when you're in the backstretch of writing your manuscript, even if there's lots of revisions you want to make and you're still workshopping it, I would argue it's still really useful to write your query during that phase of the creative project or creative process, because the query letter is so informative, not just for the agent or editor you're going to send it to, but for yourself. You begin to see when you write the query how to look at your book from the outside in. What is its biggest appeal? What is the tightness of its themes or its plot? And so in having to distill that down in a query, it can affect the writing process, particularly the back-end writing process, where you do want to make sure that arc is really tight, that the themes are coming across. So I would write it when you're still writing the back end or rewriting the back end of your project, but don't send it out. At least that's what everybody says. I will admit, I've sent out a few queries before the proposal was quite finished or before the manuscript was finished, because I figure, well, they're either going to ghost me or take forever. So at least if it's out there, it'll really keep me motivated to write. So, with all these mandates, just use a little logic to make sure they make sense for you. So another thing is we could have put this anywhere, but a typical book is 80,000 words. If your first line in your query is, my book is 175,000 words, then you better write a very good query because, that's just not as appealing in the front end. But that does not mean if you don't have the perfect 175,000 word novel that, you shouldn't go for it. So.
Yeah. And I'd just like to mention this up front here as well, which is we're talking about querying that's going off to potential literary agent or editor. I just want to mention for some of the new faces around here, we did a previous session similar to this all about literary agents. So for folks that may want to be more learn more about that, we highly encourage you to look up on the Howe's YouTube page. There's a link to that as well, and we'll put that in the description of this video when it goes out. And there'll also be references for researching literary agents as well in that. Now, kind of getting back to the subject at hand, pivoting a little bit into potential do's and don'ts for query letters. What does the audience think of some key red flags or things that you absolutely would want to include? What comes to mind?
I think the don'ts are more fun. So what would be something that people might do when they query that you think doesn't serve the process?
Tell them about their dog.
Or talk too much about yourself or something that's irrelevant to what the story is about.
Yeah, put your whole autobiography in. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's your favorite. It's your family's favorite thing to read it at
Right,
Christmas
you know what?
dinner.
Oh, that's good. Related to that, of course, is the agent or editor's time is so limited. And I once read and had this mentality for a long time, and it didn't serve, was that every time a query crosses an agent or editor's desk, they just can't wait to find a reason to say no. And I used to think, look, because that's not very inviting when I'm writing it. But more recently, I read something that I like better, which is they can't wait to find the gem that stands out and just gets them so excited. And that's helped me mentality-wise to write the queries. But certainly, if you're going on and on, it's all about you, and they need to know what they need to know. What is the book? What's the book about? What's its hook? Blah, blah, blah. Then too much biography or autobiography, too much of anything just isn't going to endear them to you. And there again, back to my first point, they're human beings. So you've got a lot of catch-up to do if you don't endear yourself to them in some way. Partly by showing your professionalism, by knowing what a query letter should and shouldn't be. So.
Oh, can we get the next slide, please? Thank you.
The do's and don'ts?
Yeah, I think it's time to go through them.
Yeah. So there's a lot of components, or not a lot, but there's certain components that need to be in a query letter. And one of them is sort of a hook or a short synopsis. If you go to Publishers Marketplace, which is a great online resource, you're going to see book deals. And in the new book deals that they put on that website, they have a lot of one-sentence descriptions or hooks. So you can be inundated with sort of how people have written their hooks. And what's beautiful about seeing a bunch of them at once is you can see that they have many iterations. So while there's certain forms to a query letter and forms to hooks and forms to the components within a query letter, that doesn't mean it's formulaic. But anyway, that's a great resource. Obviously, when you are going to send to an agent or an editor, you want to make sure it's a really good fit. Publishers Marketplace also tells you this agent represents this kind of work. She sold this book. And you do want to make sure that they've sold books because if they haven't, you're checking them out as much as they're checking you out. So again, Publishers Marketplace is a great resource, as is, I forgot to put this on here, Query Tracker, which is a really good online resource for finding the data about agents, but also helping you track your queries. So look at the customization of your query for each agent, but certainly you want to make sure it's not just this generic form letter like we get from the bank or whatever. This is so key. You want to workshop the bejesus out of your query because you are the writer. You are inside the box. And so how do you know if it's really communicating or appealing to someone outside of yourself? So query it maybe among friends, even better among people that aren't on your side, because you really want either a neutral or somewhat indifferent audience to see if they're hooked or not. And of course, it's fun to, I think, revise and fix your query to get it better and better and elevate it. You can send out queries in batches of 5 or 10 or 10. I think that's kind of typical. And you might start hitting double digits quickly, but you don't want to give up. But you do, if you do get feedback about your query letter, either from the people you're sending it to or others, you do, if you're getting nowhere, want to consider tweaking it for sure. And that's why you don't want to send perhaps 75 out at once, because hey, what if there's a typo in it? But what if it really isn't, hitting the mark? And then back to the don'ts, you don't want to go on and on about I've worked on this for 10 years and getting up at 4 a.m. and my family really love that kind of editorializing, the commentary. They just don't care yet. They're not your friend yet. The bragging or humble bragging, even worse. I know you're going to love this because I am probably the best person to ever write this kind of stuff. I didn't know this one, but more recently I learned this. Don't mention your title as a working title. This is just a little thing, but I always would put in queries. My working title is blah, blah, blah. And because I figured I was hedging my bets, but they know it's a working title. And so I guess it just makes you seem a little naive if you say working title because that's understood. So I didn't know that, but I've taken it out in the times I've queried since then. Same thing, don't tell your agent, visit my web. If you want more information, visit my website. For one thing, all those word packages add up. Believe me, if they want to, they will visit your website. So it's just part of your contact information. This is where the end of the letter can kind of trickle out. For more information, visit my website. And you don't want that. You want to end strong. And some of this is back in after you started sending queries out. But, oh God, I just read this recently too. If you're worried about rejection, that's nothing compared to being ghosted. And probably well more than half of agents or editors ghost now instead of sending even a form letter. And I find that very rude. but it's the reality. And if you are ghosted, I think one response, one follow-up, hey, what's your problem? Perhaps more delicately worded is plenty. And of course, the same old, good luck with this one, right? Don't take rejection personally. The antidote to that is to be in writing groups, to be around writers, because we're all getting rejected all the time, and it normalizes it, and it means nothing often in terms of the quality of your manuscript. It's more about the fit, the timing, and all that. So if anybody has tips on how not to take rejection personally, please flood my inbox with them. I am getting better at it, but... So those are some do's and don'ts, and we'll of course revisit those as we go and look at the letters themselves that we have as samples or when we get more into the discussion.
Yeah. So Joni, I really appreciated you highlighting the need for catering each letter to a specific agent. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how much and specifically what to include in this section? You mentioned citing authors and agents that agent has published. Is there anything else we should know to include specifically?
Again, it's a letter to a specific human being. So there's ways to personalize it that vary. One could be if you went to, a conference and you met the agent, which is always a great idea because the FaceTime definitely helps to give you a little more in. You would certainly want to personalize it and say, you invited me, I met you at blah, blah conference and you invited me to send you a query. So that... First time I did that, though, I was looking for this editor who I thought would be really good. Well, her name is Jeremy, but I thought it was a man. So I went up to her and I said, yes, I'm llooking for Jeremy. Do you know where he is? But the good news is I did sell her the book. But so that's the kind of personalization you can do, or if, your author so-and-so, felt that my book would be a good match for your list. That's personalization. We were talking about dogs. Jenna was talking about dogs a little later, not to mention it. But again, we could go to the back end of a query letter, and in the bio, you could say, I live in Vermont, blah, blah, blah. And, as I read on your agency profile, I have standard poodles too. So that actually isn't a bad thing. It's, again, that human connection. So there's lots of little ways. And I think that's where the subtleties and the humanity and the real connection can happen in those personalization moments. So, but of course you don't want to be too chummy or too wordy about any of this, but you can kind of see how would you write a letter to someone that where the stakes aren't so high. It's kind of that same kind of personalization. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I imagine, at least speaking for myself, many here may have been published in university presses, journals, and magazines, but maybe also with keeping specifically in mind folks that have had limited exposure to the publishing world. What specifically could we include in our bio section of the query letter to best present ourselves to a potential literary agent?
It's a good question, and we'll see some good examples of that. Certainly, if you've been published in a respectable periodical, or through a respectable publisher, you would certainly want to mention that in the bio. The other thing, depending on what genre your query letter is about, is you could talk about other forms of publishing, but you really want to quantify it. Like you don't want to just say, oh, and I have a blog related to this. You say I have a blog with 10,000 followers. So they want they don't just, or a lot of people have read this and really like it. They don't want to know any of that. It's really got to be quantified. So that kind of specificity in the bio, or if it's woven in, definitely can help it. Yeah. Any publication, if it's a very small publication, or is your blog and you don't have many followers, then they're not interested in that, generally speaking.
I imagine it may also be very worthwhile if you've gone to any sort of writers' retreats or workshops or anything like that. Like you've done like a degree in writing to an extent, or whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'd be definitely worth putting in sort of like your credentials there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, for those of you in the MALS program, speak about your attendance with that. And I lead writing workshops, and I think that manuscripts that have been through writing workshops are clearly going to be probably stronger because somebody has taken a lot of time to give feedback and revise. So that is a great line in the bio. This manuscript, the entire manuscript has been workshopped, and blah, blah, blah. It's just it's a short line, but you can imagine, look what it shows. It shows you take your writing seriously, you've invested in it, you've revised it. So that's a great addendum for the bio or for the end.
Yeah, wonderful. So I've heard that many literary agents do not open any attached query letters in their emails. Some even have protective software to auto-delete messages such as this. Has this been your experience?
Wow.
And is it generally the safer route to always include the query letter in the body of the email itself?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to refer back to these are human beings. So one more action that you're requesting they take is only going to annoy them. So it's a letter, it's a query letter. It's your first contact with them. It should just be in the email, the body of the email. That said, if you are going to include a proposal, that of course shouldn't be in the body of the email. But it's a letter, so let them just open it up, and there it is, pithy, has the components they want, and they have nothing to open or worry about in terms of, glitches or bugs.
Yeah, you mentioned workshopping query letters, and I know the Dartmouth Writers Society is having one with you next week, so this is perhaps especially pertinent. Can you elaborate on what workshoppers should specifically be looking for when evaluating a drafted query letter?
Well, they should be looking for feedback that shows if their idea is instantly hitting the mark, if it's clear, if it contains their voice, is it accessible? Would it make somebody want to ask for a manuscript? I mean, when we throw some of the discussion out to the audience, I mean, Lisa's had her query letter workshopped, and I think to great effect. It's a gorgeous query letter. And so people can talk about how the experience helped or served or didn't serve. But, obviously our manuscripts are written for readers, and it helps to have outsiders look at that. But think about the query, like it's got to be so short and so tight. And we're at that point probably exhausted at looking at our own writing. What the hell are we writing about, And so it really is critical to get outside readers to give you feedback. And the beautiful thing about feedback is you can take it or leave it. Use it to inform your own writing process. If somebody gives you wacko, responses, you don't have to take them, but boy, can it really help you to see it. The other thing that really helps in is a form of feedback that I love and have written about is feedback is also a discussion. It's not me saying, now fix that line and move that and do this and here's that. Sometimes feedback is absolutely that, or this doesn't work, or I love that part. That's certainly feedback too, but feedback can be a conversation where you hear yourself talk about your book, and suddenly in the dialogue, you're hitting it. You're getting that pit, that excitement, that passion, that connection. So that's another way to avail yourself of feedback and make a query letter sing a little bit more.
Absolutely. I think this is a wonderful pivot point into getting into the specific query letter, query elements
Great.
slide here.
Great. So we've talked or touched on some of these. When you had asked about personalizing a query letter, I talked about the in. You know, if you've been referred to this agent by a noted author, or she herself or he asked you to pitch them, then why not lead with that? Before I go any further, though, by the way, a lot of these overlap. It says fiction query elements, and they are specific to if you have a fiction project, but a lot of these overlap with nonfiction proposals too. There's just a difference in the back end. The perfect hook is key. 150 to 300 words. And there's who's your protagonist, what's he want, what's stopping them, and what's the twist or the curveball. And that's, 150 to 300 words. One thing that I've seen in queries in earlier drafts that isn't as successful is if the writer goes through every nitty-gritty part of their plot. Because when you summarize a plot, like any summary, it can be boring. Even if it's really a good plot, if it's a summary, it can feel kind of boring. And so you really have to hit the highlights, the big notes. And so that's that. What's your main character? What you want? What's stopping her? And of course, the goal is to make the agent or editor really want to know what happens. So a hook raises questions and provokes curiosity. And again, there can be a brief synopsis, but again, you want to keep it exciting, keep it almost like a trailer. There was an interesting thing I read that some agents and editors want you to include your ending and others don't. And this is really typical of what you'll hear if you go to publishing panels and two agents and an editor are sitting, next to each other. And one agent will say, never send me a query. This is back in the old days on perfume stationery. And the agent next to her will say, I love perfume stationery. And one editor will say, never tell me the ending of your book. And the editor next to her will say, you better tell me the ending or I don't want to see your manuscript. The point being is follow your own instincts because, again, these are just people and some have pet peeves and biases and others don't. But I like this example of how somebody who really does advocate for revealing your ending in the synopsis, in the query, writes, so here's the hook. Two teens from very different cultures and with very different priorities collide as one of them is about to be deported and must decide whether to give love a chance. So you can see the stakes. We know what who our protagonists, in this case, our two main characters are. We know the setting and the situation. We know what's stopping them from getting what they want. And then I like the way he treated the ending. The deportation goes through and Natasha and Daniel don't get their happily ever after. Lest readers think all is lost, they meet again years later, opening a surprising opportunity for the universe to continue to work in its mysterious ways. So he doesn't go into this big extensive, here's how it all happened or ended, but he does, I think, very much allude successfully to the promise of a successful or a satisfying ending. So I thought that was a really good job. If you're going to reveal your ending or want to prove you got the whole plot figured out, that was a beautiful example of that. What has to always be in a query letter are the facts. So your genre, word count, title. If you don't know your genre, you should, but sometimes they can be the lines can blur between genres, but you can certainly then make a comparison. My 78,000 word mystery is similar in appeal to the popular Death on Tap series. I made that up, but so that they instantly get a sense of where that book is going to be on the bookshelf. Because first and foremost, a query has to appeal to the agent or editor in that it has to help them see how they would sell this book, who they would sell it to, and how they would sell it. So knowing where it would fit on a bookshelf, knowing what other types of successful books are like it, really begins already to give them the language that they can bring back to the acquisitions committee, which includes the sales force and marketing and promotion, who really are the ones who I think get often the last say. So you can see how that language helps already say, oh, that book is sort of like Death on Tap. That was a popular series. I wish I'd written it. So you can see that helps to both define the genre and it helps to make the comparison between your book and a successful book. So, and then the bio, which is 50 to 100 words. And we've talked about personalization. I saw you publish so-and-so, in Writer's Market, and I feel like mine would fit in your roster nicely or whatever. The other reason you want to review the publisher and make sure that it's a good fit is because you don't want to waste your time. But also if they've just put out a book, like a memoir on driving cross country, in a horse trailer or whatever, then you probably won't have much of a shot because they just put out a book like that. But if there's a book within the same realm, and it's a nice comparison, it shows you did your homework, you were respectful. So it would be very sincerely flattering if you put something like that in there. And then a closing sentence we've already talked about, you don't want to just go on and on and on, just, I hope to hear from you soon or whatever. So those are the components that need to take up about 3/4 of a page or so in a query if you have a fiction manuscript ready to go.
So, Joni, we're getting into the writing of a query letter, but I believe here's a good time to emphasize some of the other important things to have prepared before you do, perhaps, in addition to a polished and complete manuscript of any kind. Before querying a literary agent, depending on the agent, you may be asked to provide one or many of the following: a pitch, a log line, a short synopsis, or even a full synopsis. In helping to set the stage a bit more, can you please briefly go over what these are and why an agent may ask you for them?
Yeah. Well, that's almost a trick question because I don't think an agent would ask for any of those individually or prior to a query. Most of those are excellent components in the query. So could you take them one by one? What was, for example, the
a pitch.
So pitch is kind of what we're talking about. It's the general query is a pitch, I think. So at least that's my understanding. So they're synonymous in that case. So they wouldn't say, give me a pitch and then, okay, now query me. The pitch and the query are synonymous.
Then a log line.
So a log line also would be a component, really neat component. A component of a query letter. You think of those more in film now, often the log line. But if you have a really good one, a 1 to 2 sentences, often they're just one sentence, right in your face, this is what it's about, log line for your novel, then that could be a good lead for your query. It's similar, though, if not somewhat synonymous to the hook, the log line is. Make sure you know the distinction, though, between a log line, which is a summary, a quick hook or summary of your book. Who wants what are the stakes, and what's the twist, versus, for example, a tagline, which is a marketing line. And so there's a little bit of a distinction. But so the log line would be, I think, another way to put it more in novelistic or prose terms is your hook.
And then a short synopsis.
And that would be, and we'll see some of this in the letters, a little bit of an elaboration on your plot. Again, not plot point, but an elaboration of your plot so that it leaves the reader breathless or, really, if not breathless, certainly captivated. So, yeah.
And then finally, a full synopsis.
So that would be something you don't include. That's something that hopefully the recipient would ask for, depending on what you're pitching, of course, because you're not necessarily going to give them a synopsis, a full synopsis. They might, if it's fiction, want the manuscript. But if it's nonfiction, they might very much want a synopsis, which would, though, be a component of the proposal. So if you're pitching nonfiction works, you need a proposal. And if you're pitching fiction, then at some point they might ask for a long synopsis, but they really rather just have the manuscript, however many pages they initially ask for. So I hope that clarified some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that point, before we move on, any questions from the audience about anything we've talked about so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talk about nonfiction and a book proposal. So if you're writing memoir, you need to write a proposal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And nonfiction, narrative nonfiction can cover a bit of a swath of genres, like a memoir or a collection of personal essays, or it could be somewhat of a prescriptive book. I think, my books for writers are somewhat prescriptive. So they all would fall into that category, and they would all require a proposal. And similar to how I advocate writing the query when you're in the backstretch of writing your novel, you don't need to have the nonfiction work written to sell that. That's a very big distinction between fiction and nonfiction. But I would argue that writing the proposal at any phase of writing your nonfiction book really serves. I just had this experience. It clarifies, what the hell am I writing about? What brings it all together? What are themes that when I write the proposal, I discover themes that really had not been consciously paying attention to, but in having to write the proposal, it really brings them forth. It's just so exciting. You begin to see your book as a book too, which is really motivating to help you keep writing it or to help you with your, keeping your spirits up and selling it. So a proposal is, similar to a query in that there's a lot of drafts you usually have to do, and there are key components that have to be in it, but it is so enlightening in terms of your project. And I find it gets you excited about your project. So.
I had a question too, and I did want to say I've noticed in querying that half of them, like out of 20, 10 want the proposal right up front, and the other ones say, we'll ask for it if we want it. But it's always best to have it, right?
Yeah.
But I wondered at what point do you question whether it's working? So at what point, is it like 20? Just asking for a friend, or is it like 50 or 100? Like at what point are you like, this is not working? And do I send like hey, I sent you this on such and such date? So when do you make that decision?
Well, I've heard stories of people who give up after 50 and they shouldn't. There's 50 more you can do it, you can send to. So you might need a breather, for your mental health and whatever, but I think if you're very confident in your query, if you workshopped it, if you continue to revisit it, then, how many people have you exhausted?
Right. But how soon do I wait before if you haven't heard, before I change it and go, this one's not working, do I change it and try something else?
Yeah, that's tricky.
Okay.
And you don't want to second guess just because people aren't responding doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. I don't know. I think that might have to be a personal choice, but maybe just for the heck of it, change it a little bit just to see if you, wiggle the dial a little bit or change the formula a little bit. But that's, it's brutal out there, but not if you realize and really find a community of writers and see how typical this is, how we're all in it together. And heard a lovely story today, and I've heard this story before. I've written about typical stories like this. A woman, I think, had sent out to about 50, was obviously starting to feel discouraged, regrouped, gathered herself up, sent to 50 more, and they were all no's but one. And it only takes one, and her book is doing just fine. And I've had that experience with publishers where I would get yeses to my queries, and then you get in and they want to meet you and all. And I think there was like 6 meetings, and there was no, and yes. It only takes one, even when you get that far. So it takes a lot of stamina, but it's worth it. The other thing I have to say was in our other Howe event is the world has changed, and we're hearing a lot of negative stuff about publishing, but it has changed for the better enormously in that there are multiple paths to publishing. So nobody can say your book will not hit the market. It just depends on which path to publishing you want to go to. And if your book is right for the big 5, which means it's a commercial book, and probably they're going to look at it, will it sell 10,000 copies before it even goes on sale in pre-orders? All right, go that route. Or is it something where definitely a traditional publisher would want it, but not the big 5? It's not that type of book. This isn't about quality. This is about fit. And then there's the independent publishers, and then there's hybrid publishers, and then there's self-publishing like Amazon, and then there's blogging. So you can get your book out there, absolutely. And readers couldn't care less. They really, really couldn't. So you got a good book, you can get it out there. And I think that absolutely buoys my spirit when I'm sending out queries, that nobody can tell me I can't do this. They're just not going to let me do it with them.
I do have a question. I was curious about tone, because I have heard folks say that your query letter should show off your style, but then that kind of throws me off a bit, because what if your style is writing in dialect or writing in some kind of weird way? So I wonder, Do you think there's a better approach versus just letting them know I'm a professional, approachable person and here's info about my book? Or, dive in, lead it, like with your tagline and being kind of showy a little. I guess I've heard things that have hinted at both, and I was wondering what you thought.
Yeah. I equate tone with voice, that mysterious thing that, can sometimes be the main appeal of a certain type of writing. That is the main appeal of my type of writing, because it's not that I write on popular subjects or that I'm a world famous, but the voice is the appeal. And so tone and voice in that letter. And I think the components of a query letter are such that they don't lend too much variation in tone, but in the interstices, for sure. We have a query letter that's probably the last one as an example, where I think it exemplifies. She used her tone of voice. There's a certain tone that she used that just, I think, made the editor like her. And it was in there. But some of the other examples as well will show that they're not leading with a creative voice or being funny or whatever. But there are some people that say, if, for example, yours is a humor book, then you would want to infuse just a little bit of that into your query to begin to sell them on the voice as well. So it's a kind of a vague answer. I apologize, but I think the letters, as we have the samples, will show how they kind of inserted some voice or tone into it without, going bananas or not getting to the point. So
I think that works as a perfect transition into getting into the samples we have.
So you guys can kind of look at this, and read along, but I'll just open or look at the two. Well, actually, this is a perfect example of how long a query letter should be. It has a hook, it has a synopsis, and then a very brief bio that hopefully sells the writer. So you can see that it begins with a hook, begins with a terrible death, flash forward to 1 year. So it actually is interesting because it begins with the circumstances or the situation of the book. And then, though, it gets to what we were talking about earlier. Who's the protagonist? What's the problem? What do they want? And what's the twist? And I think paragraph 2 really, really gets to that. So it's an interesting query letter because I think the first paragraph does hook, but the second paragraph really reflects that three-pronged, who's the character, what do they want, and what's the twist, and what's in the way, really gets into that. And then there's more context, a little bit more synopsis, if you will, that we use that word. And you can see they've defined for the agent who this would appeal to. It should appeal widely to fans of all kinds of suspense, from classic murder mystery to contemporary thriller. That line flies in the face of what I've read, that when you say who it appeals to, the last thing you want to do is go too broad, because this will appeal to all women. I'm making fun of myself because I think I actually said that 100 years ago in a query letter. But this actually feels a little bit broad to me. I don't think it would be a deal breaker, but it's interesting because they're just throwing a lot in there. And those are different genres, suspense, thrillers. They're not the same genre. So it shows a little naivete, if you ask me. But again, I think that the synopsis, the hook and the synopsis were so strong for me that it didn't make me feel like some agent would say no. You can see how they name drop Gillian Flynn.
Yeah.
So that's how it's worked in. So instead of the wordiness of readers who love Gillian Flynn's novel, Gone Girl, blah, 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 she just throws in the author's name. If you have an author that big that you're going to compare yourself to, you don't need to list all their novels or the novel it's compared to. There is a danger to comparing yourself to big bestsellers because it can sound snotty. There's something about this that doesn't, to me, sound snotty. So again, it's that little magic formula, My book will have all the appeal of Gillian Flynn's novel. That sounds like, come on. But in this way she wrote it, it just doesn't. And then people have asked, well, gosh, what if I'm not published? Or what if my bio isn't that interesting? I think this is a good example of clearly this person hasn't been published. And there's a little bit of personality in that bio part. I don't think this is a stellar example, but I think it's got, particularly how the book is described, was really good. But again, I think the audience could be clear, and I think the bio could just have a little more punch. Though I love that they have a true crime blog. And they quantified it, 500 unique viewers a month. Because it's fiction, how many followers you have isn't as important. If it's nonfiction, unfortunately, it is really important to have some kind of following or way to get a following. So you can see, to me, this is good, but not perfect. Does anybody have any thoughts about this query?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you are like literally sitting down to write the message, would you just say, dear so-and-so, comma, and then start there? Or would you be like, I want to query my book and
That's a great
and
question.
now I'm going to start, here it goes. Like,
Yeah, you want to start right away
okay.
with one of those components. So this one starts with the hook, pretty much, the one on the screen. So let's go to the next one because it starts with one of the components that has to be in here, but not the hook. And so it's interesting and to some degree probably reflects people's personal taste, but this one starts with the factual information. So remember, you need the hook, and then you need kind of the synopsis, and then you need the factual information, and you need a bio. And you can hint at, where the book, who might be engaged with the book. So this starts with the factual information. And this one's Clash of the Query Letters contest. And it's in the genre of fantasy, obviously. I think that they didn't have that many intrigues. This is fine, but again, it's very personal. And there's a human being on the other side, of that email. But I don't really care about facts if I don't know you yet. Everybody since cave writing days wants a story. That's what a hook is. That's what that synopsis is. And I can't imagine anyone being more engaged by some stranger's book title that is 56,000 words and that it'll appeal to fans. Who says? So that information is excellent. But to me, and I think a lot of query letters start with that kind of information, I don't feel like it puts me in a good mindset as an agent or editor. It's all about them, about information. I don't care yet. If it got moved down to after the hook and the synopsis, I would be, not the title has to be up front or near the front. I would be much more interested to learn that it's 56,000 words and who it appeals to. But right now they're telling me facts that just are irrelevant and don't engage. I think that most agents and editors, certainly if I was one, want the story first. And now I'm in. Now you can give me information. It's similar to writing. You want to open with scene. You want to open and hook us with immersive information. You don't want to open with information nobody asked you to give them yet. So, but this is a different way to do that. So again, start right in. And then when she gets to describing the book, I think she does a good job. 12-year-old Alex Parker, there's the main character, the protagonist. There's the situation, the conflict, and then it goes on to say what the twist is, which is a good twist. The thing about this letter also, though, is I think that the story is captured well, but I don't think it's that well written. Starting sentences with however, then Alex's words. I don't know. It just felt like it could have added, it wouldn't have hurt it to have a little editing in this. But I did think they did a good job of describing their novel in a way that, and fantasy in a way that to me makes it feel kind of page turning. And then I very much liked their bio. I've been involved both as a writer and organizer with the Muskoka Novel Marathon. It just shows they're serious, that they're engaged with the writing community, and that they're outwardly looking, annual fundraiser, spent 10 years, and then just, I feel like I know this writer a little bit. I live in a village in Ontario with a husband and daughters and small menagerie of animals, which is relevant to the storyline. So that to me was a great example of a bio. When you don't have, this is my 5th novel, I'm a best-selling author. So I thought that was dear. So again, you can kind of see and that had a tone to it. You can see, and it's going to be very personal, but what appeals to you in these and what do you think could be a little finessed? And it might be different for everybody, but not that different.
I just have one quick question
Yeah.
while we're on this particular subject. 'Cause we had seen an example for fiction and then getting into fantasy here. I just wanted to quickly ask if you somewhat hinted or alluded at it, where the formatting can be flexible with the query letter. I'm wondering if how flexible that can be, and is there a preferred format for
Sure.
certain genres?
No, I don't think so, because we see enough examples, again, with the, when we were talking about the fiction query elements, particularly the front end are the same as for fiction, nonfiction. The end, if there is one, we met and you told me you'd love to represent me, that would be a good way to start. So if there's that, but then right to the hook, and then the facts, and then the bio. And in the interstices, can you and the closing, which is just on, but in the interstices, can you personalize it? So that's pretty much the formula. We just saw two examples where one put the facts up first and the hook secondary. But so there's wiggle room in how you present those components, but they all have to be in there. But they kind of manifest in slightly different ways. And underneath it all is that appeal of your own voice. Is it warm? Is it professional? Is it showing off? Is it just feel like you're a real person beneath it?
What's your opinion about whether to include the end or not? I know it's controversial, but in your experience, what do you think?
I think it's really good to do it in the drafting process, because sometimes I think a lot of people will write, only to discover that she, wasn't the woman she thought she would be. That kind of vagueness, I don't think appeals to agents. It feels untrustworthy. And it's so if you can write the end in a draft or two, and then make sure it's not just in the end, they get married on July 7th and they do, you don't want that. But I think you do want to capture some sense of closure, and that there's an inherent surprise or epiphany in it. And it might take some iterations to figure out how to do that without it being giving away everything, but also not being so open-ended, So I think they also feel like without some sense of where it goes, it can make your story sound more generic, and so by you closing it a little bit, it distinguishes it from the other stories that are about, women seeking to find themselves, or, men in midlife crises who have to reinvent, themselves or whatever. So without going further than that, it's like, yeah, there's a billion books like that. How is yours a little bit different? So.
We can move on to the next one.
Sure.
Just in the interest of time and everything.
Yeah. Oh, so you can see that a lot of the elements are going to be the same for a narrative nonfiction query, the end, the hook, the facts. Then we have a point of differentiation, which is your platform. And that's really important to put in if you're pitching a nonfiction work. Do you already have visibility with an audience? If you're claiming to be an expert in something, I've taught writing workshops for 25 years and have a mailing list, and and 10,000 subscribers to my podcast. So you want to quantify your platform. And again, we already talked about buyers, but that, readers who, are determined to, save the planet, and do so in a way that doesn't compromise their lifestyle is a defined buyership. So versus just people who care, would like this book. So you want to be specific. We talked about bio already and personalization, and the same with the simple close. So the platform and being a little bit more specific about the buyers, but particularly the platform, is the distinguishing factor when you're pitching or querying a work of narrative nonfiction. So that can be important. I think we have a couple query letters that, or at least one, that demonstrate that a bit. So I thought this was an excellent query letter. I mean, you don't have to agree on it, but it's just really, this is the memoir, right? So it just really, it sets up the problem, well, first of all, of course, it introduces you to the narrator, the me in the memoir, and it sets up the problem and the challenge, and then it talks about, and you can see by the third paragraph, it also intimates the ending. But I think in a way that keeps it open and makes me want to know how it happened, but does suggest the writer really went somewhere in her memoir. So I think it's really well done. And obviously the facts are not buried, the facts are presented in there up front in a 1,000-word memoir, Hidden Parent. So I think it's beautifully written and personal. With a memoir, when you're pitching something written in first person, a collection of essays or a memoir, you would want to say I, not refer to them in the third person, as if you're talking about yourself in the third person. So she does that, of course. And then if we have if you wouldn't mind the next page of this letter, and you can see this letter is probably about a good solid page and a half. Then she does, I think, a great job of really defining who would be interested in this book, and then her own platform. As a blogger who writes regularly, build up a community of 3,000 readers. And I love, here's where voice came in. This is one that I think has a beautiful voice. Wanting to connect even further with this audience is another reason why I wrote this book. I just think she really does care about her subject matter, and that came through, I thought, beautifully. You can see the comparables, the other books she compares herself to, but she doesn't just say it's like them. She says why, and she says how hers is different. And so that little tweak also makes that really good than just, my book is like David Sedaris' best of collection. That is not enough to say that. But why? If you're going to say that, why? And she, I think, distinguishes very well why her book is compared to these. And I just love whose newest title resonated deeply with my experiences. And while my book takes a more personal approach to the topic as a narrative memoir, which is a great distinction, one person treated her topic not as a memoir or narratively, more factually, more informationally. She distinguishes hers as a personal approach. And I just love that she closed with, I'd be honored to find myself in such company. And you might not like that, but I do. Everything that she wrote in this letter felt like, I don't know this person. It sounds like I'm talking about like my sister or myself. But I'm going to write this woman a fan letter. I just think that voice feels sincere. And so I thought that was a pretty, and then just, best wishes. So this one, I thought this was a really good query letter for a memoir. Does anybody have any reactions to it or questions about it, or more reactions to it, really? Because maybe I'm whack, maybe it doesn't resonate.
I thought you might want to make them shorter.
Well, yeah, you're right, short, pithy and short is good. I think for narrative nonfiction, they expect about a solid page or even a page and a half. Fiction, you don't want to go past a page. So I think this is in that realm. The other thing too is, people love 120,000 word book if it's really good. And I think people can endure another 50 words of a query letter if every word counts. So again, there's, I think, a little bit of wiggle room, but in general, you're absolutely right. To get 2 full, dense pages is really getting pretty long for a query letter. And it just visually, when they open it, isn't going to earn you any points. Like, oh God, I got to read 2 pages. And I know it's online, but you can imagine, again, they're just sitting there and they want instantly, visually, for them to see you're professional right away, even before they start reading. So are there other thoughts about this query letter? Clearly, she's my best friend.
I do like the phrasing of the end when she says, my book is thematically complementary to several works in your catalog. And just the way she makes that transition, it does feel very professional to me, but natural.
Yes,
it feels
the
very
art,
natural.
isn't it? So we know the components now. The art is making it now. I looked you up and saw that you published this versus, my book is thematically complementary to several works in your catalog. And then she qualifies that. So that's why it takes revision to sound natural. Put it all in there, but not just formula.
jump to
Sure.
This is the last one we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully a lot of you are also writing essays or have short individual pieces to protect, perhaps shop around. So this query was for the Modern Love column. This is from a good friend of mine. And so I asked her, do you have any query letters? Because I know she sold to The Independent and she sold to The Times and she sold to Post and her personal essays. And, you know, what she heard and went off, and in particular the Modern Love editor says, we couldn't care less about the query. But that is not true. I am sure that is not true. Because you want, when they open up your enclosure, your essay, you want them to be in a good frame of mind, right? And just something this brief with a voice, this was the one that has a really, I think, beautiful voice to it, that I think would put an editor in a better frame of mind when they read an essay. So it's not going to change their mind if they don't like it. But I think, like anything, if you're in a better frame of mind when you start doing something, you're going to be more open to seeing its positive assets. So I thought this really captured her voice and reflected somewhat her writing style. And that, I think, is killing two birds with one stone. So it's casual, it's accessible, and of course, she did get her essay published in Modern Love.
Joni, I think if we could, because it's so brief, would someone feel comfortable reading this? Or I can? Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Dear Modern Love editors, recently I went to my local bakery and asked a man working behind the counter if he would like to go on a date. It was terrifying. I'd never asked out a man before, choosing instead to hope in silence and wait patiently like I was in a Jane Austen novel. The experience was a turning point for me because I learned, at 36 years old, better late than never, how to rise to the occasion and speak up for what I wanted. I write for a living and reside in Prospect Heights with my dog, who looks like Falcor from the Neverending Story. I'd love to hear from you if you like my story. Warmest of warm regards.
Thank you.
But this is very purposely casual, and I think, well, obviously warmest of warm regards. And you know, who gets away with that? But I think she does. And how can that not put the editor in a certain frame of mind? So, and of course, she's not wasting his time. And if you look at it, this abbreviated query letter has all the same elements almost as, for example, a query letter for a novel or a longer prose piece. There's the hook, refers to the main character. There's her flaw. She was terrified to ask someone out. There's the conflict. And she even alludes to the ending, how to rise to the occasion and speak up for what I wanted. So the elements of a longer query letter are already in there. There's zero bio in here in terms of the typical stuff. I've been published here or there or whatever. And that I really don't think matters. When you're trying to sell an essay, people, it really won't make a big difference. I mean, if you have it, you're not going to withhold it. Like, you know, I've been published in the New Yorker fiction section where you wouldn't withhold it, but it won't make a difference. It really won't. And so it didn't matter that at this point in her career, I don't think she had a lot of credentials. And boy, though, why not lead with your strength? And in this case, lead with your tone, because you can imagine how many queries they get. Here's something great about Modern Love, though. They answer every single submission. So they don't go. So it could be, I think somebody just got a rejection 6 months later. Somebody that was in my workshop a couple of days ago, but still it's dignifying the writer. So they answer every single query. And but lead with your strength. And here it was the voice. And of course, in an essay, the voice is so important. So why not show off your voice in here? So she was gracious and said we could use this. So, do you guys know the name of the essay? It'd be fun for you guys to look it up. The Baker Boy is the name of her essay. And of course, you can see them online, and I forget who reads hers, but it's a good essay, obviously. So let's see. What else?
Let's see. I think we're done with yeah. So next, this last bit was kind of, I don't know what to expect with this other than the idea is hopefully to present a work in progress query letter and then have in kind of real time have some feedback.
Oh, guys.
So please be gentle.
Oh, so this is Matt's query. So,
Yeah.
so everybody listen, and then we can give them some feedback. Would you read just the hook at first?
Yeah, I found out after this wonderful presentation, this is gonna be rough. So please be kind. All right,
It's
so
just a draft.
so start with the title or
Start where you started.
Start where I started,
We're
okay.
busy agents and
Okay.
editors. Let's
All right. I'm sorry for taking your time. Okay, the title
You don't
is
want to start with an apology.
Yeah, don't.
the title is Samozvaniec, or quote the in parentheses the Pretender, and then I'd be publishing this under my Russian name Alexander Malakov, and then in parentheses after that it would be for literary fiction. So dear Mrs. Mr. And then we would have the hook is a fraud is a terrible thing to be unless that's all there's left, and just go into the rest.
Just read a paragraph or just
Okay.
like what you kind of consider the continuation of the hook / short synopsis.
So this would be more of a synopsis, a short synopsis then. This collection examines a few of the lives of those in the Russian diaspora that relocated to Boston, Massachusetts following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. What We Keep explores Mr. Brooks, a private writing instructor and failed professor who is found at the professional mercy of his boss and his high school student's father. He is tasked to forge college documents for a student, a traumatized Russian orphan. As he struggles to navigate the uncertain dynamics his job and livelihood depend on, he must also reconcile with what remains of his former professorial dream. And then that's next would just be Moonflower follows Sasha, a young woman in her mid-20s. After the sudden death of her mother, Sasha and her oligarch father leave Russia for Boston, Massachusetts in a haze of grief. In a fight for independence from her controlling father and to assert agency over her bereavement, she runs away to London, England. The Tailor's Prize begins with Radovan Spiva on a trip to Ufa with his parents. There he is captivated by a spider web he sees in the botanical garden and is inspired to become a tailor. His mother agrees to teach him how to sew with the condition that he attend the local theater with her. Detesting the performances, once his skills improve, Radovan travels to Moscow to apprentice with a legendary sartor. His relationship with his master dissolves after some time, leaving him no choice but to leave Russia for the US. Alone and without alternatives, he desperately clings to the American dream, overwhelmed by uncertainty. And finally, Samozvaniec starts with an empty whiskey glass, a raging argument about masculinity, and a competition between professional dancers for a date with a beautiful woman. Raphael, a member of the last generation adopted from Russia to the US, overhears another guest mention something about the war in Ukraine. Waiting for his next round, he reflects on what it means to be Russian.
Yeah. All right. What do you guys think about the hook?
I found it at the very end, the second to last section that you read. The second to, you know which one I was talking, go back, I think it was like, I don't know where your paragraph breaks were.
Oh, yeah.
You said it starts.
Oh, yeah. So Samozvaniec starts, so that's also the title of one of the pieces in
Right,
it.
because there's.
Okay.
Right, so that would be like the title piece.
Okay.
Starts with an empty glass, an empty whiskey glass, a raging argument about masculinity, and a competition between professional dancers for a date with a beautiful woman.
And that's the title
Oh, the fourth
story.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, well, that was well synopsized, that title story for sure. What else, you guys?
I feel like your descriptions of each story were enticing and great. I feel like reflecting on it now, it isn't evident to me right from the get-go that what the hook means relative to the descriptions. Like, I'm more interested in the descriptions than how the hook like ties them all together. But I agree that opening line for the last story was really good. Like, that felt more like an opening, maybe.
Gotcha.
You know, my overall impression was that your descriptions of the individual stories are way too much for the query. But when you write your proposal, those will be lovely because then they're ready for that. And they did capture each story. in the query, if you're going to itemize, say, 3 stories as examples, which I think is a good idea, I think you almost want to get each one of them down to one sentence. Like, I'm going to be paraphrasing because this won't even be accurate, but, you know, a student travels to Moscow for a coveted internship only to realize he can't come home again. I'm making that up, but one of them was sort of loosely read. Like that, I don't want any names. And that's another thing they talk about. You'll see in one of the ones we shared too, names can be so confusing right away. So 2 mismatched, you know, a mismatched couple goes on a White Robber trip versus Truman and Lois go on it. You can see. So, you know, one thing is we can get easily overwhelmed with names or details. So the description of those overwhelm me in a query, but they didn't or wouldn't in a proposal. So in any draft, first of all, a draft is just a beautiful thing because it's how you get to the next draft. But it also serves because I don't think it works exactly the way you wrote it, but you already now have components of the proposal. One thing I would do is front load, and I don't like you offsetting your hook in a way, the way you did, but maybe that's just fine. You had this really good line as a hook. But I think one thing you might want to do is the first paragraph after that is more about in this, and make sure you clarify it's a short story collection. In this short story collection, you know, I explore themes of, you know, diaspora, you know, loss, and the persistence of the human spirit. You don't want to be quite that big, but you know what I mean? And then maybe one-liners for, you know, among the stories is one about somebody who blah, 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 you know, so just to distill it down a little bit. But to be honest, I think you have that draft or 2 ahead of you, but this really sounds like a good book. Like already there is a strong pull in it, in the connectivity of these stories. I mean, it really is compelling, really compelling.
So I'm curious as a listener, are the 4 stories, do they ever intertwine and everybody is related at the end? Is there some sort of?
So the interconnectivity is intended to be the location of Boston, Massachusetts in the time frame of post-Soviet dissolution.
So they don't ever all sit at the bar and have a drink?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, so that might be part of the query letter, is that you say something that it's the location that binds them, not the people themselves or the situations.
And I think you want to be one in this collection of 13 short stories. You know, all my characters hail from Boston, Massachusetts, but their journeys and their passions, you know, create, you know,
they're from different neighborhoods.
Yeah,
they're not from the same table.
Yeah, but I don't think it's at all going to hurt the book or the power of the book that they don't interact. It's not like a Winesburg, Ohio kind of thing. But
no, I just think it helps explain
the
method or the logic behind the 13 stories.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really want to read the book from your description of your stories. It's beautiful.
Oh, were they beautiful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I was wondering if, and it's just a curiosity question, if your descriptions of the stories are the order of the stories as they're going to appear.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well done.
And I'm still thinking about that first sentence that you read really fast.
Can you read it again? That first sentence?
It's the first beginning.
Your log
of
line.
Oh, a fraud is a terrible thing to be
That's it.
unless that's all there's left.
a fraud is a terrible thing to be unless.
Unless that's all there's left.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if you helped us with that with your. Is that part of the query, Joni, or is that part of what it is about, or is that like the?
It's an interesting line because I do really like it, and again, we're going to get into very subjective territory, but I might like it better as the thematic tie-in at the end, where I'm now ready for it. I've had a taste of these stories, and connecting them all is a sense of being an imposter or a fish out of water, man without an island, with the theme of fraud is a terrible follow. Because now there's context, it's a strong line, but without context, it doesn't work as well.
It's hard to put your head in it.
Yeah.
But I love that line.
Yeah,
because it got me thinking
Me too.
right off the bat. But to your point, it got me thinking, I missed the next line because I was
thinking about that.
thinking about that
Yeah.
because it's it's provocative, I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a real heartbeat. Yes.
I have more of a question, in this situation where you kind of have a persona or a pen name that you are writing from, can you talk about like this, how you would work that into a query letter or not? Like, since it seems like with the query letter, you're really going for authenticity and like, hey, we're going to be buddies. And then at the same time, you have a professional name, this Russian name that very clearly ties in with your subject matter. But if you slip up at some point and say signed Matthew, that's going to be confusing. Can you talk, like, did J.K. Rowling query as J.K. Rowling? Or, there are whole genres where it's really common to have pen names.
Well, I'm not very much an expert in that. When I was reacting specifically to what Matthew wrote, I thought that information, it didn't serve as well up front. Like, again, it's sort of like, why are you telling me this? I'm always putting on my mean hat, but as the buyer, now I care. I can see this man can write. I'm fascinated and I sincerely mean this by this collection. Then in the bio, my intention, or however you say it, is to publish this collection under my Russian name. Now that is really relevant bio information, and maybe a little bit of why, not as a gimmick, but because it shows my connection to this blah, blah, blah. So I think that would be beautiful bio material, just not upfront. I'm always sensitive, both in reading manuscripts and now in reading queries, is don't tell somebody what they couldn't care less about until they care. So that it's a 56,000 word, closing. I don't care. Until now, I know this is a good story. And so that's not quite as strong, I don't mean that quite as strong with yours, but I will really care that your intention is to publish this under a name for specific reasons after I'm already hooked with the book. So,
But if you move if you move the log line, as you suggested before, down, and also the detail about the name change, how do you start it then? How would you start that query letter?
yeah, I would, so in this, short story collection of 13, the cast of characters all hail from Boston, but none of them feel at home. But, in one story, someone travels to Moscow to get a coveted internship, only to discover home isn't, 1,300 miles away either. But another one, and then another, and then that beautiful, beautiful line where it has more resonance, I think, right there, which reinforces the theme of feeling like an imposter. But what if that's who you really are? Which is a brilliant theme, because it's academic and emotional at the same time. Like, what if being a fraud is really who you are? That is a great question. I mean, you worded it better, and I think the stories did intimate the promise of that situation where nobody is ever really. And that's why I think the fact that they all hail from Boston certainly is connective tissue and a beautiful kind of hub for them, but it also speaks to place and geography, which I think is a theme of Europe, on what is home and what isn't. So I think that while it could be a boring fact in some things, I think it's a relevant fact in this one.
So that's about all I have for
Yeah,
the
no,
query side.
yeah,
And
good.
I want to be also mindful of time.
Sure.
But does anybody, I want to open up for like Q&A about literally anything we talked about this evening. Does anybody have any questions, concerns while we're all here?
I do have a question. If you're publishing something or you're querying something that is made of essays or short stories, do you say how many sections and then the whole word count, or is it worth it to say, this is, 15 very short things, or it's 6 essays, but they're long and like, because I was curious, because I'm thinking, would it be acceptable for a short story collection to maybe be like slimmer than a novel would be?
A good question. I think that anything between 50,000 and 90,000 is pretty normal, but of course you would want to quantify that in your proposal. Now, I was just looking at an essay collection that came out from my publisher. It's 70 pages shorter than mine. I'm like, why did I write those extras? No, but it answers your point. You know, hers is a beautiful collection. But it is a slim book, but it's still a collection. You know, it's not like just she stapled a bunch of essays together. But yeah, I think you would definitely want to mention that, but it's not, I think it's a problem. If it's 30,000 words, that's not really a book yet. But if it's 60 for sure, or 79, I think 1,000 words is what mine is. They're all within normal range for sure. Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
I did have another one, and that is, you mentioned, if you know an editor or agent, like if they've had a certain book, like you mentioned one, like, if they wrote something, if they just published something about a horse going across country or something, then how do you know, like to query. So how close do you think, like at what point are you like, that's too specific and familiar, or it fits like their genre?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, that grief query, that company was, or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't the grief, I'm thinking of your book. The parenting book about children, that company seemed to have lots of books on parenting, and hers was going to fit within that category.
Yeah.
So it's like it feathers in.
I would not rule out pitching somebody if they already had sold a book that had somewhat similar themes or plots, because for one thing, everything's been written, and so all you would really want to do is distinguish yours more clearly in the query letter, because it's it's in the details, it's in your voice that's going to distinguish it. So unless it's one for one practically, or if you're worried about it, then I would make an extra point to make that distinction clear. While this is this, mine does this. Or even this was written by a man, and this is a woman's perspective, or vice versa. So yeah, just make a point to distinguish it. But it's nice if an agent has sold books in that realm, then they know how to sell books in that realm. So that's why fit is really important, and the same with an editor. You want to go to an editor whose distribution channels, whose sales force is familiar with this type of book. So, and you in the letter are giving them language already to kind of help them see it and see how they would sell it with a line like what Matt gave, or with some of the lines we've heard. They could think of the sales force as maybe people who will not even, who maybe won't read your book, who won't read your book. They're just going to sell it. So they need to know exactly how to talk to the bookstore owner and tell them where it'll go and why it's a good book. And they will not have read your book. So when you back in the query letter writing phase, or back there, you're already helping that sales force, who is part of the acquisitions committee, know how to sell your book. So, that is coming full circle. That is the job of a query. It is a sales letter. And it's to help them know how they will sell your book. Because when you pitch an agent or an editor, you're pitching a potential business partner. And while they, I'm sure, love books, they probably will have to just as readily turn down the books they might love to read as the books they think they're going to, over books that they think will sell. So your job in the letter is to, in your own voice and warmth, convince them this book has an audience and I'm the right person to write it. And I can help you sell it because it's a good book. So that's all.
I think that perfectly wraps things up. So I'd like to thank Joni. Absolutely. Thank you. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Howe, Jared and Megan, for being our producers for this evening. Thank you very much. And and also for the audience, both here and online, whoever it may be. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time and participating in the ways that you have. Please take some food.
Yes, no problem.
Please feel free to hang around for a little bit and converse and everything. But again, thank you so much for being here.
Good luck with your querying.
Good luck,
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.